Once again, I find myself making a video on a game I never planned on doing, but Dungeons of Hinterberg is one of those games that the more I played it, the more I felt compelled to make a video as I got sucked into its incredibly well-paced gameplay loop that almost always made me feel rewarded for every action or choice I made, with its unique social RPG mechanics, fun but simple gameplay, in a world full of interesting dungeons that was an absolute joy to look at with its vibrant colors. But like with any game I play, I did have a few issues that I'll get into later, but for now, I want to say there will be some spoilers in this video. Nothing crazy since everything I want to discuss can pretty much be covered without them, but figured I'd still warn all of you anyway. With that said, I'm ready to dive into what makes Dungeons of Hinterberg such a fun experience, starting with the mechanics and how they design the gameplay around them. So the basis of the game is you are playing as Louisa, a lawyer who has decided to go on vacation in the village of Hinterberg, where magic has awoken, leading to it becoming a world-renowned tourist attraction that people from all over the world flock to so they can tackle dungeons and fight monsters that have appeared along with the magic. But basically, after entering the village of Hinterberg and learning the ropes of how everything works, the game introduces you to a daily system that I would say takes place in phases that you go through, which are morning, noon, evening, and night. Each one of these have their own flow to them, you could say. During the morning, you basically experience various story beats as different characters visit you depending on what you have done in the game, and it's also where you choose where you want to go exploring for the afternoon, which depending on how far into the game you are, you will have 4 different areas to choose from. Then once you have chosen which one you want to go to, time advances from morning to noon. Then once you have arrived at said area, you have a variety of available options. These range from spending the afternoon with a friend, taking the sights of a scenic spot, or diving into a dungeon, and all of these have different benefits which I'll get to in a second. But after completing any of these 3 things, because you can only do one of these things at a time in an afternoon, time advances to the evening. Now, during the evening part of your day, you are able to wander around Hinterberg to various shops where you can restock on health and magic potions. Maybe buy some better weapons or armor, though you really won't ever need to do this. At least for me, I got all my best gear constantly from just doing dungeons, so it just seemed like a waste to me. Then you have a variety of characters that can perform some services for you. Claws will clean weapons covered in goo for you so their stats can be restored. Hannah can enchant your sword with a variety of effects like extra damage, or she can upgrade your armor for better defenses. There's even a scientist that can shrink your charms down, which are basically what it sounds like, charms that you can equip that give you various different effects, like when you kill an enemy, a shockwave spreads out from their body, which to me is easily one of the best charms in the game that I highly recommend you use. But once you're done running around shopping and getting these services done, outside of certain story moments, you are free to spend the evening with a character to deepen your relationship with them. Or you could just say screw them and go to a movie or spend time in a spa. But either way, once you have done one of these things, time will advance and you will finally be at nighttime, which will place you in your hotel room. Here you can watch TV, read the Hinterberg guide, or go to sleep, which then moves you on to the next day, though I must say reading the guide or watching TV may increase some stats for you, but it will be at the cost of having lower total health the following day. Though if I'm being honest, the game is fairly easy minus a few spots, so it's not that big of a deal having less health. Even on the hardest difficulty, I found the game a little too easy, but I also just got done with Shadow of the Erdtree, so that might play a factor in my perspective. Now with that said, you're probably wondering what is the point of all of these things. Well, depending on who you hang out with or what activities you complete during a day, which I just hinted at, you will level up one or more of the 4 main stats your character has, which are Renown, Amusement, Familiarity, and Relaxation. Why do these stats matter? Well, they allow you to do a variety of things. Some weapons and armor's full potentials only reach when you hit certain stat requirements. Also, various characters will only talk to you when you have reached a certain stat requirement as well, which bonding with characters is very important in Dungeons of Hinterberg because some of the most important features are unlocked as you level up your relationship with a character. Like Hannah, who I mentioned earlier, that does the enchanting of your sword and upgrading of your armor. you only get to do those if you get her relationship level up to 2 and 3, though at least she unlocks attack conduits for you at level 1, which is basically special attacks you can do during battle, so these rewards are very important to your character progression, and covers a very wide scope, which you can keep track of easily thanks to a nice log of the 16 different characters you can interact with, detailing where you stand relationship-wise with them, and what rewards you can earn. So it's an interesting approach to making your character more powerful without a traditional level up system like most RPGs. But that basically sums up how a day generally plays out in Dungeons of Hinterberg, and the flow of all of this is amazing. I don't know how they did it, but while I wasn't sure at first, since I'm not one to really dive into games with social sims like this, after a few hours, I was so hooked and enjoyed the moment-to-moment gameplay, I literally lost track of time, and I believe the biggest factor of this is the various dungeons you visit and the places they are within. Because the way they approach each area is pretty interesting. Unlike most games that try to throw as many abilities at you as possible, Dungeons of Hinterberg keeps it simple. Outside of your usual dodge roll with a stamina bar, the special attack conduits I mentioned earlier, your usual light and heavy attacks, each of the 4 areas you visit feature 2 distinct spells that can't be used anywhere else. And because of this, the devs were able to really design each place and the dungeons within them incredibly well around these spells. So when you're in a place like the forest area of Hinterwald, you have access to a tornado that can make you float, or create a small wind ball that can be used to throw objects. And this approach is used in all of the areas. You get a spell that, in a sense, is about allowing you to move through an environment in some way, and the other spell is some kind of projectile. So even when you're hopping around these different areas, since there's really no set order in how you have to do things, it's easy to use the various spells from different areas, even when you haven't used them for a while, which I really enjoyed. Also, you can use spells in combat, and unlike outside of combat where you're free to infinitely use them, you expend a magic bar during combat, limiting your spell usage. Though by landing light and especially heavy attacks, you can recover your magic back, so it creates a fun little dance as you're using the various tools at your disposal to win a fight, which is done inside a magic circle, so there's no running away. Though as much fun as I had with the combat, outside of the impressive boss fights that make full use of whatever area you are in spells, the normal enemy variety is pretty bland, and it did get pretty repetitive by the end of the game, which was disappointing. I really wish there would have been more truly special enemies that could only be found in each of the 4 areas that made you use your spells the way the main bosses did. Really would have spiced up combat in a big way, though luckily the dungeons do not suffer from this issue. Each time I finished the dungeon, I had a big ol' smile on my face because of how well all of them are designed. You would think you would experience some sort of copy and paste feel when going through them, but I didn't feel that at all. The devs absolutely killed it on the dungeons, which is the main point of the game. It's completing all 25 dungeons, and they really did make sure that was a magical experience. The way they make you use the featured spells of an area are truly top tier. Like, I consider a lot of these to be on par with older Legend of Zelda games. In fact, in an odd way, I would compare Dungeons of Hinterberg level designs with Majora's Mask with a Wind Waker coding. It really is a great experience that even if you dislike the social sim side of the game, it will be absolutely worth dealing with just because of how good the dungeon designs are. Also, I shouldn't discount the actual areas you travel through to get to the dungeons either. They are set up very well, making full use of your spells with secrets hidden all over the place. There are people to talk or sell things to for bonuses. Those scenic spots I mentioned way earlier, those can not only raise your main stats, but also stuff like your defenses, which your overall attack and defense get a rating that determines if you're strong enough to tackle a dungeon, which those also get ratings based on difficulty. So if your attack and defense rating is both out of 4, you probably don't want to jump into a dungeon that's a 6. Seriously, trust me, you don't. But it's an interesting system that almost acts as that traditional leveling system without the actual leveling attached to it. So in general, I really enjoyed the game, and it's one of my favorite games I've played so far this year, but there are a few issues I want to address that left me pretty disappointed. No, it's not performance issues. Minus some objects that dropped being at a way low FPS, the game performed amazing for me on my Xbox Series X. But my biggest issues is with the social sim aspect in the final area or level, if you want to call it that, which I won't show gameplay of. I will just highlight one issue I had with it. Starting with the social sim mechanics, throughout the entire game as the story unfolds, you get an impending doom feeling with the world and characters that makes it feel like you're on a time limit. Once again, a feeling that is all too strong in a game like Majora's Mask that I really hated as a child, but love as an adult. Makes me feel like I'm going to mess up in the game and let some of these characters down. For example, without mentioning names, a certain shop is getting threatened to be closed down in Hinterberg, so you need to get signatures to save it. You would think there would be a time limit on this. There's not. Take all the time you need. And this is really disappointing to me. You put in this social sim day cycle and tell a pretty interesting mature story with decent characters, but it all falls flat when you realize the impending doom feeling is fake and you're free to do whatever you want as long as you want, despite the endless dialogue you read saying otherwise. Like, punish me for taking too many evenings relaxing in a spa instead of helping people. There should have been like a 35-day limit. That way you can't help everyone and are forced to make hard choices, or maybe at least a harder difficulty that did something like this. Then the other issue with the final area I had is simply the level design compared to the rest of the game was very poor. It felt slapped together. Like, you make these incredible dungeons that I enjoyed every second of, and then I get to the final and it's incredibly flat. I was so disappointed in it. Even the final boss was disappointing. Compared to the other 4 main boss monsters in the game, it doesn't even hold a candle to them, which really sucked. I really wanted to be engaged in the spell mechanics in a truly interesting way that could have only been done during this section of the game, and they just dropped the ball here to me. I know I'm not one to be negative, but this really let me down because the rest of the game is so damn good compared to this. With that said though, overall, despite these issues I had, I do strongly recommend Dungeons of Hinterberg. It's easily one of my favorite indie games I've played. The music and art style are on point, the story is great even though I didn't really talk about it just because it's too easy to spoil parts of it. The gameplay loop is phenomenal, it scratches that Zelda itch in a way few games can, at least for me, and I really hope we get a sequel, because while not groundbreaking necessarily, it's just a damn good video game.